Okay,
Yep.
sounds good. Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. Yeah, very excited to be doing this. Yeah, gone to a lot of the Tuesday night talks, and I feel super, yeah, super happy to be able to give one. So I'm going to share some, excuse me, some of fun facts and fun research that I've been part of on the North Slope, mostly in Barrow, monitoring breeding shorebirds, and talking about my master's work up there as well. So I will mostly be focusing on Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow, and this place is super important for shorebird nesting and has one of the highest shorebird breeding densities. The North Slope in Barrow and the Waikay Delta are some of the highest. And near Barrow, there's a shorebird nest density of over 125 nests per square kilometer, which is pretty crazy, and over 10 species that have been found to breed there. And because there's so many shorebirds and it is a great area for research, the Fish and Wildlife Service has had a long-term field camp there monitoring nesting shorebirds since 2002, almost every year. And so on this Fish and Wildlife Service site, there's 8 species that breed regularly there, and these birds are coming from Asia, North America, and South America. And what's really cool about shorebirds is their different mating strategies. So some species have both both parents incubate and help raise the young. Some just have one sex, and then they also have different mating strategies like monogamy, polyandry, which is one female and multiple males. One female mates with multiple males, or polygyny, which is one male mates with multiple females. And I'll show some examples of that. And I'm not a bird photographer, so a lot of these photos are from eBird or from Milo, as pictured here. But the species that I'll talk the most about, and I'll start with, is the dunlin, which everyone there should be familiar with. So the dunlin that come through Cordova is a subspecies pacifica that flies through Cordova, or winters on the Pacific coast, flies through Cordova, and breeds on the Waikay Delta. And then the subspecies articula is a subspecies that breeds on the North Slope. And these birds are migrating through Alaska to the Yellow Sea where they winter in the China and Japan region. And this subspecies is in decline more so than the 10 other subspecies of dunlin worldwide. And this is mostly due to low adult survival on the wintering grounds, mostly in part because of habitat loss. There's a lot of tidal flat reclamation there. And so in terms of their breeding biology, they're biparental and really good study species because they return to the same site year after year and are pretty reliable in terms of collecting data on them. Other cool species that breed up there, long-billed dowitcher, which are super camouflaged on the tundra and are one of the sneakier species. There's a lot of American golden plovers that also nest up there, close relative of the Pacific golden plover. One of the main distinguishing features is the amount of white. American golden plover stop at the shoulder there, and Pacific golden plover, the white extends down. These are a really beautiful bird, especially with that gold flecks on their back there. And surprisingly, this makes them super camouflaged on the tundra when they're sitting on their nest. Even though they're a big bird that's pretty conspicuous, they blend in really well. And I also think they have some of the most camouflaged eggs. So this is a picture of their nest, maybe like 2 or 3 feet away, but there's 4 eggs there, pictured in the center. And all of these species lay 4 eggs, and they kind of have this oval shaped, their eggs are oval shaped, more pointed than like a chicken egg. And this is to, it's because they fit more closely together there, and that's been theorized as the most optimal shape to distribute heat from the incubating parent. For such a small bird, they can have 4 eggs due to this unique arrangement of eggs. And then we have the semi-palmated sandpiper, one of the more numerous species that breeds at Barrow. They get their name from the semi-palmated toes they have, so they're partially webbed, something that we see when we banned them, but very cute and pretty like aggressive for their size in terms of like trying to lead you away from their nest. And our last biparental um, species is the western sandpiper, which everybody knows a lot about. Most of the western sandpipers are nesting on the YK Delta, but they've increased in numbers nesting at Barrow. In the first years of this study in the early 2000s, there were no western sandpipers nesting there, and they've only increased year after year. Still one of the lower nesting numbers out of all the species there, but increasing. And then getting into our more unique mating system species, the pectoral sandpiper, they are one of the numerous nesting species on the site. They get their name pectoral sandpiper because of these air sacs the males have on their chest there that they use for displaying. They make this booming sound as they try to advertise to the females. And so they are a polygynous species, so the male will attract multiple females and he will mate with one female, and then once she's done laying her 4 eggs, he'll go and find another female. And there's been a lot of research done in Barrow on these species, and one team from Europe attached some sort of electrodes to pectoral sandpipers' males' brains to monitor brain activity throughout the breeding season, and they found that they hardly sleep at all. They are so like testosterone fueled, just want to mate, that they do not sleep. And on the extreme end, they found that one male was active for over 95% of the time for 19 days. So they're just sleeping in these like micro-minute naps throughout the day. And then the females incubate slowly by themselves and raise the young. And then getting into phalaropes, there's 2 phalarope species in Alaska and Barrow, the red phalarope and the redneck phalarope. And these are polyandrous species. So unlike most species, the female is more colorful. So she's on the left there. And she is the one that attracts males. And the males will mate with her. She'll lay 4 eggs for one male and then go and mate with a different male and lay eggs for him. And so the male for both phalarope species is the ones that take care of the eggs and raise the young. And I like to make the joke, maybe that's the ideal mating strategy. And then redneck phalarope, same thing, polyandrous. This is a female, more colorful with the red on the neck there. The phalaropes are super cool in that they spin to feed and they kind of create this vortex. So they have partially lobed toes, kind of like a duck, but not quite fully webbed. And so they'll spin in a circle, create this vortex that sucks up small organisms closer to the surface so they can just peck off the surface to eat. So now that we know more about the species that are nesting at Barrow, just talking a little bit briefly about how shorebird nest monitoring is conducted and kind of like what it entails. And this is just like traditional shorebird nest monitoring that's done across the state for tundra nesting species. And so this entails finding shorebird nests and then monitoring them throughout the breeding season and really doing a lot of intensive nest searching and monitoring in a certain area. And what we can learn from this type of monitoring, there's a lot of information, but it's mostly just focused around what's happening at the nest. And so we can know if an adult's at the nest or not and how many eggs there are. There's ways to determine the age of the nest by floating the eggs. So you can know when the nest was initiated and when birds started incubating and when they are expected to hatch. By visiting the nest, we can also know if the nest failed or was successful, and from that we can look at nest survival, so understanding what percentage of the nests were successful. And then a lot of these nests, we try and catch the adults that are on the nest. And by catching an adult, you can collect morphometric data, see how, which can tell you what sex they are, as well as collecting samples like blood and feathers for like isotope sampling, so we can see where birds were like molting and like measure stress levels on the breeding ground versus on the wintering ground. So there's a lot of information we can learn at the nest, but this all requires the first you have to find a nest, and they're pretty secretive species. There can be secretive species, but it also means that you are spending a lot of time at the nest area, flushing an adult, leaving scent at the nest, and we're also leaving physical markers there so we can re-find them. So it's just a whole lot of human presence and disturbance to get this data. And although we're learning a lot from spending time at the nest, there's a lot of stuff that we're also missing with this traditional shorebird nest monitoring. Pretty much anything leading up to a bird sitting on a nest, we don't really know what they're doing after they arrive on the breeding grounds and how they might move to their territory or establish pairs. We also only really know what's happening when a bird is at the nest, so when they are away on their incubation breaks, we're not sure where they're going to feed or how far they're traveling, nor how they might be interacting with their pair or with other pairs nearby. And then after they're done nesting, like say their nest hatches, shorebirds are precocial, and so they'll hatch, and within 24 hours the chicks will leave the nest. And we don't really know what birds are doing after they leave the nest, and it's really hard to monitor things like chick survival. And then after that, post-breeding, we're unsure how long birds are staying in the area around barrow or if they're leaving immediately. And so there's a lot of stuff that we're still trying to learn about shorebirds during the breeding season. And with advancement of certain technologies, we're able to learn more things using things like temperature sensors. Here in the left, in the center of this nest, there's a little temperature probe there that can tell us when a bird is on the nest and how much time they're spending there down to the minute. We can also use things like trail cameras, like on the right there, to maybe document predation events, see what species are depredating nests, or maybe see adult behavior at the nest. But with shorebirds, it's really hard to see that because they're so small and pretty camouflaged in this grass. And then more recently, tracking devices like RFID tags and PIT tags and satellite tags are being used. And in the last 5 years, there's been more and more research about using GPS tags to monitor nests. And so this is an alternative method. Instead of visiting a nest and having a lot of human presence, that a bird can be monitored more remotely and the GPS locations reviewed to assess nesting patterns. So all of this has been done on much larger species. One shorebird species in Europe on the right there, I believe it's a curlew of some type, but none have really looked at smaller species, and this is mostly due to limitations in GPS devices. But for my study, we used at the time in 2021 some of the smallest GPS tags that had the greatest capabilities. These are 3.6 gram high frequency GPS transmitters. So 3.6 grams is really small, but dunlin weigh like 50 to 70 grams. So this can be anywhere from like 5 to 7% of their body weight. So it's still a lot for this small species. This tag is pretty accurate with 85% of the points within a 10-meter radius, which is what we needed that type of accuracy to be able to find their nests. And then importantly, these tags are solar powered, and especially in the 24-hour daylight in barrow, they were able to have enough battery life, which is another limitation in GPS tags. They recorded locations at 15-minute intervals, which really provided some cool information, movement information. And then this tag, we were able to download data remotely up to a kilometer away. So we were able to tag a bird and then not have to see them nor their nest to be able to get the location data back. And the idea was to monitor birds throughout the whole breeding season. So we were capturing them pre-breeding. So as soon as they arrived in Barrow, trying to get a tag on them and monitor their movements. So this is what it looks like in Barrow in mid-May. Most of the tundra is completely snow covered, but in the landfill on the left there, and then just along the road to the landfill, there's this open water, and this is where the birds are hanging out, where they're able to find some food and forage during still pretty snowy, freezing conditions. And so I spent a lot of time in the dump, which is just where open water was the 2 years I was there, catching birds. And we used these whoosh nets that were remote operated that that half circle would flop over where the birds were feeding, and they'd be trapped under the net where we could get them. And over 4 years, 2 years I was there, and 2 years another grad student was capturing birds, we tagged 125 dunlin. So this was both males and females, as well as some birds that we knew were nesting at the same nest. And so this is what the tag looks like on the back of a dunlin. We super glued it there so it would fall off when they molt before migration, so the birds were not migrating with this tag. And then kind of hard to see, but we're also color banding them so they're uniquely marked, so you can recite them from a distance and know which individual or which cohort that was. And then to download the data, it involved walking around with this large pole and antenna, hoping to get within a kilometer or closer of a bird to download their data. And the goal is to never see a bird, never like walk by its nest of our tagged birds. And we didn't really know where these birds were going, and so just I spent a long time just wandering the tundra, which was awesome. But kind of some days you would walk, 8 or 10 miles and not download anything, and some days you'd get really lucky. So, but all this allowed us to track the birds from pre to post breeding and get a lot of information. So this is an animation of the first year of data, so just 1 year of bird movement, 34 birds and over 135,000 locations, and that's a lot, but some birds only downloaded maybe 10 locations, and another downloaded up to 5,000. And so this is the town of Barrow here. The birds were mostly captured here and here, so this is where the locations will first pop up. And then each color represents one bird, and each dot is one location. So during the pre-breeding season here, the birds are mostly moving around until they queue into one spot, like these birds over here in the east, that they're spending all their time in one location. And then into July here, nests fail and they're moving around more in the post-breeding. But it's really cool to see how birds are moving on the landscape throughout the whole summer there. When we look at specific time periods using this GPS data, we can see interesting behaviors during the pre-breeding. So this is just an example of a couple birds one summer who were captured in the blue square here. This is where the transmitters were attached, and then they nested in the blue circles out here. All of these birds used along their transition from pre-breeding to nesting, they traveled along this black line here, which is one of the few maintained roads by the city of Barrow. And so these birds are using the open water from where they plowed in these human-altered areas to be able to feed on their way out to their nesting areas. And so just kind of an interesting take on what birds are doing pre-breeding and how things that humans are doing can affect their movements. And then some other examples of pre-breeding movements. This bird on the left here was captured right here and ended up nesting in the yellow circle. And during the pre-breeding time, he only used human-altered areas for feeding. So this area here is a gas plant that had a lot of open water from where they plowed. In town also plowed, and then the landfill of another plowed area. And so pre-breeding, he's only moving between these open water areas and where he's nesting. And so this bird was really cued in to where it wanted to nest, probably nested there in the past, and was just going there and as much as he could until the snow opened up, and he stayed there once the snow was free. On the other hand, this bird was probably a young bird, maybe its first time nesting. It was tagged here, and only 17 hours after we placed a GPS transmitter on it, it made this 100-kilometer trip way down along the coast, checked out a bunch of areas, and then came back, checked out areas around Barrow, and then nested in this yellow circle. So these two are the total extremes of really localized movement and then prospecting other areas. And then getting into the nesting movement, which is what I focused my master's on. This is an animation showing a pair. The male is in blue and the female is in red. And their movements during territory establishment here, where they're in a specific maybe 200, 500 meter circle area. And then eventually they start spending the most of their time. Those dots are all concentrated in one area in the yellow circle there. And this is because dunlin, they're biparental incubation, that they'll take 12-hour turns incubating and then 12 hours off feeding. And I'll just play it once more. But you can see that they spend a lot of time at that one area, and then when they're not at that area, they're away from the nest. Another interesting thing to see here is differences in, like, the male is mostly feeding to the west of the nest there, and the female is mostly to the east. And so we see there's not a whole lot of overlap in where they're moving when they're on their incubation breaks. So once we knew where a bird was nesting, like in that yellow circle there, we then, well, I mostly looked at their movements in relation to their nest. And so this graph here on the y-axis is the distance from the nest in meters, and then the x-axis is the date in the breeding season. And so it's broken into different seasons of the nesting period, or stages of the breeding season. So during the pre-breeding here, this bird is mostly feeding in areas that end up being 2 kilometers and 5 kilometers away from their nest. And then eventually tundra opens up some, and they start spending some time in their territory, but then go back to feed, visit their territory, feed, and so on, having these pretty regular patterns of spending maybe 10, 12 hours feeding and then at their nest. Once the tundra is snow-free, maybe their mate is around more, they are in the territory establishment nest building period where they are staying within like 300 meters of their nest there. They're not traveling very far away at all. Then during egg laying, that distance decreases a little bit more. They're spending more time at the nest. In the zoomed out view, it's kind of hard to see. And then in the incubation, they're spending that 12 hours at the nest and then 12 hours away. So they're taking turns with their mate as they incubate. And if we were to zoom in more on this period here for a pair, we can see again on the y-axis distance from the nest in meters, 0 meaning the birds were at the nest, and then below 0 is not negative, it's just the female. Female on the bottom and male on the top, and then date on the x-axis. So during this territory established at nest building, they're spending most of their time, within 300 meters of the nest. The male may be spending a little bit more time because he's the one that builds the nest. During egg laying, he is doing some partial incubation. She's spending some time there. But once incubation really starts, there's this pretty cool pattern where the male is on the nest for those 10 to 12 hours, and when he leaves, she's on the nest. And it is this pretty exact switch. They take these turns, and we get this wave-like pattern as they're on and off the nest. Also in this graph, we can see like the female is pretty specific, traveling like 400 to 500 meters away during her incubation breaks, while the male is more sporadic. maybe earlier in incubation, he's still traveling a little bit farther, maintaining that territory, making sure no other males are coming in, and then into the breeding period, incubation period, he's spending more time closer to the nest. And then looking at the post-breeding period, um, this is an example of the movements of one male who nested here in the white circle, and these are his GPS locations during the nesting period. But afterward, he made these zigzag movements across the tundra, checking out maybe other feeding areas, maybe prospecting future places he'd want to nest in the future, and then spent a lot of time in this area over here, which may be an important post-breeding area. Birds may be possibly molting a little bit during this time. Dunlin do a partial molt throughout the breeding season, so he might have spent some time there finishing up that molt before he eventually came back and checked out his initial nesting site again. So this is a really interesting insight into what birds are doing once they're done nesting. We weren't sure how much time they spend on the North Slope before just heading to staging areas before they migrate south. So overall, these GPS tags were able to show us a lot of really cool insights into breeding period, things that we haven't been able to even be able to like try to comprehend before using these tags. And yeah, we could look at pre-breeding, how they're moving to their nesting sites, what they're doing during incubation as well as on those incubation breaks, and how they differ between males and females. And then what I'm focusing on, what I'll share next, is the nest fate and nest survival of these nests that were using these GPS tags. Then we could also look at renesting, birds that their first group of eggs failed and then they nested again, and then those movements into the post-breeding period. So my master's work was looking at assessing the effects of human disturbance on dunlin nest survival, and this was using the location data from those GPS tags, some of those examples I just shared, and then comparing them with 2 other levels of human disturbance. And I did it for 2 years for my master's, and then another grad student continued it for 2 more, and so I have 4 years of data that I'll share. So the 3 nest monitoring methods were, first, the GPS monitored. So once the bird was tagged with a GPS transmitter, we never saw it nor the nest again. And so this is the minimal disturbance. This is as if a bird was nesting on its own out in the tundra, and nobody would ever know it was there. And so this is kind of like the true, quote unquote, true nest survival. The second intermediate level of human disturbance are the temperature monitored nests, and that was that picture I shared with the temperature probe in between all the eggs. These nests were found and the temperature probe was placed. The nest was marked with a flag, and then it was visited minimally or not at all. And we were able to determine nest survival based on those temperature signatures. And the third nest monitoring method is what Fish and Wildlife Service has been doing for the last 20 plus years. And this is where nests are found and then visited every 5 days or even more frequently. And these plots have a whole lot of human presence, that somebody is there for 4 hours, 6 days a week, nest searching. And then there's a lot of scent at the nest. There's a physical marker showing where the nest is at, and then the adult might be banded. So there's a whole lot of human disturbance. So GPS is least, temperature monitored is second, and then human monitored is the highest disturbance. So getting into the results, this is comparing nest survival, so the odds that a nest will survive to hatch chicks. The y-axis is overall nest survival, so this is 80% of nests will survive down to 20%. For that nest, it's a 20% chance of survival up to 80%. And then across the 4 years of the study on the x-axis. And the main takeaway from this is that GPS monitored nests in the green color there had significantly higher nest survival than the 2 other monitoring methods for all 4 years. And so temperature monitored nests and human monitored nests that had some form of human presence had a much lower nest survival than these nests that were undisturbed. So it's just showing that when you visit a nest, when a dunlin nest is visited at the site, the likelihood of it surviving to hatch is a lot lower. So general conclusions from these tags is that they provide some really cool new insights into what these birds are doing, being able to monitor all breeding movements of things that weren't even conceivable prior to this, and that we were able to do this all remotely without any sort of human disturbance. And then my master's work showed that human visits for this study are biasing nest survival, and so this likely might change how nests are monitored, or at least how we think about monitoring nests, knowing that what we are doing, our research methods, are likely having an effect, which could have a lot of implications for past and future nest survival studies, considering that the way that we might have been doing this is causing lower nest survival values than we thought. But of course, all of this has a lot of comes with a lot of limitations with how the data was collected, and these tags are pretty awesome, but the download range was not always a full kilometer. Sometimes it was 100 meters, and so we missed a lot of information, a lot of locations that we weren't able to download, and some birds we never heard from, probably due to download range distance. And of course, attaching something to a bird can affect it. We did see that all the birds that we tagged and downloaded enough locations from, they did nest, so it wasn't affecting their ability to mate or incubate. And then we also saw that there was that one really long distance and several others that traveled really far, and so we know that it's likely not inhibiting their ability to fly, but it's really hard thing to compare to birds that aren't that don't have a GPS attached to them, because we don't know those values to know if these are normal movements or not. And then one of the biggest things is that these GPS tags cost $1,200, so it's impossible to be able to put them on every bird that we want to know what they're doing. And so really cool, but it's not, the technology isn't quite there to do a full study using just these tags. And then just the final takeaways from this research. My research is that researchers need to recognize the negative effect we can have on our studies and be able to recognize that and possibly minimize it as much as possible. And this is just the results that we found from just 4 years at one site with one species. And there's a need for assessing this with more species and more sites. And although remote monitoring devices can have some limitations, we can gain a lot more insights and have a lot less bias on nest survival. So there's a lot of pros to it despite the limitations. And I would just like to acknowledge those that provided funding for this project, that it was a really big grant from NIFWIF that supplied the funding for the tags. And then I'd like to thank the Ukpealvik Inupiat Corporation and North Slope Borough for kindly permitting us to conduct research on their lands, and then all the wonderful people that helped collect the data over the years. And thank you guys for listening, and I would love to answer your questions.
Sarah.
Hi, Pete.
Can you tell us what the living population was doing in 2021, 22, 23, and 24?
Yes, it has been really low. 2020, 2021, I saw, it was pretty low. 2022 was like maybe saw 10 lemmings all summer. And then I think 2023 was a like slightly moderate year, and I don't know 2024. But the lemming population, how it uh, applies to dunlin nesting, is that there's a lot of predators, jaegers, and snowy owls, foxes that will nest if it's a high lemming year, and that takes a lot of the predation pressure off of uh, nesting species up there. So if there's low lemmings, a lot of those predators will focus more heavily on eating eggs or chicks.
And that was the case 2022 and 2023, looks like, from your graph.
Yes. Yep. I can go back to that. Yep. There's also like snow level uh, plays into that. 2022 had a late snow year, so just a shortened breeding season too.
So what were the main causes of loss? When you talk nest survival, what was the loss?
Yeah, Scott. It's all predation. Jaegers, foxes. There's a little bit of abandonment that an adult will just stop incubating. Oh, yeah, mostly depredation.
Sarah, this is Dana.
I know Dana. Hi.
Talked a few years ago about this. You said the traditional way to mark a nest was with a little wire with a flag on it,
Yep.
but that both the avian and the terrestrial predators were able to key in on that and figure out that that was marking a nest.
Yep. Yeah. So the nests for 20 years on the Fish and Wildlife Service plots have been marked with a little like surveyor flag at 10 meters, a popsicle stick at 5 meters, and a popsicle stick 1 meter away from the nest. And yeah, I've seen trail camera footage of a Jaeger landing at the surveyor flag, walking a circle around till it finds a popsicle stick, pulls up the popsicle stick, and walks around till it finds a second popsicle stick, and then eats the nest. Likely, which is why all of this might be just at this one site. There could be one single Jaeger that has learned to easily find our nest, or a fox has learned that by following human scent in this one area, it'll lead them directly to a nest. And so, yeah, there's a lot of nuances, and without being able to follow the predators, it's hard to determine if that's the case.
Sarah, do you know me?
I do know you, Milo.
I have a question, and I think you might have hinted at the answer. When we used to radio collar elk, right after we put a radio collar on, we saw pretty wild movements, and then they settled back into a herd, where we already had radio collars. And you showed those long distance movements, especially that one bird that went 100 kilometers, I think, after putting the transmitter on it. Have you considered that could have been stressful movement from having placed the transmitter on it and then it settled down after it got used to it?
I hadn't really thought about it. I think if a dunlin was stressed out by having this device placed on it, that it'd almost be the opposite and maybe not travel as much. Would be my guess about it. It's just like so hard that we don't know what birds are doing during the pre-breeding period to like know if that's a weird movement or not. And there's just like such variety. Yeah, it'd be something to think about more is what's normal and what's an effect of the tag or what's an effect of it snowed a lot this day.
And then Ben Americus, what are you up to?
Yeah, I got a question. Hey, what's the deal with the males and the females going different directions? Is that normal?
Hi Ben. I think it's just like preference of habitat for feeding, or maybe the male is trying to like defend part of its territory more. Maybe there's another pair that's nesting closer one direction, but
Except for a few areas.
Thanks. Yeah, really cool research. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
Sarah, this is Tony Godes. I was wondering about the dump scene
Oh.
and the water. Did you ever do any like water testing and like and what were they eating in the water at the dump? I mean,
Yeah, there's they mostly eat invertebrates, and so during early in the season, things are more just thawed at that point and coming out of hibernation. I don't know that much about the insect life cycle up there, but mostly like chironomids, like little fly and mosquito larvae, as far as I know. The dump is not a clean space, as you can imagine, and I don't know, what the effects of that is. It is for a week, maybe 2 weeks of their time, but they just finished migrating and they're hungry and trying to eat a lot, so it could definitely have some effect. Um, yeah, they're still able to nest and be successful. So.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I just couldn't help but think, if they're following the roads and if they're anything like the roads around here with the snow plows, I mean, that's like very dirty. So yeah, that's crazy that that's their main, that's what they gravitate to because of the open water.
For sure, which it'd be really cool to tag birds not near a town with a road system and see how they behave. Pretty interesting. My advisor, who has been doing this project for 20 years, Rick, didn't expect that, and he was joking about how all the roads and near Prudhoe and like the Willow Project, you could argue that maybe it's increasing habitat by having more roads and more open area, but some pros and cons to having roads for birds.
Hey Sarah, this is Lance.
Hi Lance.
I'm just curious, did any of your birds end up with GPS backpacks multiple years, or was it all just a one and done?
It was just one and done. We would have loved to have caught the same bird again, but they have like about a 30% return rate on the plots from previous research. So the odds of our bird coming back and being like resighted and then trying to catch it again were so low. It was not easy catching birds in general, and to be able to like target one specific bird was super hard. It took like 2 weeks to put out 11 tags the first year when we were trying to figure it out, and that was going out at all hours of the day. But wish we could have.
Sarah, you weren't able to recover any of those, were you? The monitors?
We recovered a couple. Some of them fell off or the bird was depredated. It's kind of hard to tell, but we were able to find them on the ground and reuse them. But that was like 10 of the 125, so very few. And they also are losing these like around Barrow or across the North Slope on their way south. So. And you also had to like download the locations. So you just happened to like randomly walk by it, download the data, and then look at it and say, this tag has been in the same spot for 5 days, and then go and try and find a little brown thing on the brown tundra. So.
I think Ben had a question.
Yeah, I think Ben Americas just asked a question in the chat.
Okay, I can't see the chat right now.
It said, will the birds fly through during the festival? Is that what it said?
Shorebirds,
Yes.
Yeah. These dunlin won't. These dunlin are wintering in Asia, but other dunlin will be. It would be really fun to see some of these dunlin in Cordova, but they won't. The dunlin do get resighted in Asia though, which is pretty cool that some of these birds that I tagged have been seen there, and yeah, bird watchers go really crazy trying to get photos of the engraved flag here. Like this one says maybe NYU, but they will get pictures of this metal band, which is really hard to read even when you're holding the bird. And so they get resighted elsewhere, but yeah, not in Cordova.
Have you been to the wintering grounds that you're speaking of?
No, that would be a pretty ideal job, would be to like go follow the birds' migration and hang out, you know, on the wintering grounds in the winter, and then up on the North Slope for the summer.
You're working on it, probably.
Yeah, that'd be really awesome.
Unrelated, but a humpback whale that I photographed the fluke of on December 28th, just before New Year's, was just resighted this week in Hawaii.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Yeah.
I uploaded it to Happy Whale and got a response.
Nice.
So Hamish, do you know what route they take across from Asia, these dunlin?
Yeah, Hamish, another grad student has tracked them with like geolocators, so it's not very precise data, really precise latitudinally, but not necessarily longitudinally, but they go down to like the Seward Peninsula, a little bit into the YK, and then jump over to Japan, or Kamchatka, and then Japan, and then China.
Any Aleutians, or?
I don't think any were seen in the Aleutians, no. I think once they leave Alaska, that's like the start of the journey where they can make the largest hop. The Pacifica dunlin do hang out near like, the start of the Alaska Peninsula, but I don't think, far down into the Aleutians.
Kind of into the wind, you know.
Sarah, when do dunlins molt, and when do they actually leave the North Slope?
They leave the North Slope. Another student found August through September, but they've also been seen into early October up there. Wow. And then dunlin are a weird one, that they will molt their flight feathers, their primaries on their main flight feathers while nesting. So you'll catch a bird on the nest and they have just a chunk missing out of their feathers. So molting their primaries on the breeding grounds, and then body feathers along the way, migrating both north and south, and then primaries on, or just secondaries on the wintering ground, and then so you can, a dunlin that you catch in Barrow, you can collect some of their black breast feathers here to see how stressed they were during migration. You can collect some of their primary feathers to see stress levels during the breeding season, and then secondaries also for the wintering period. So that's unique for dunlin. Most birds are not molting their primaries on the breeding grounds.
How do you test their stress from their feathers?
That is some lab testing. The cortisol, which is a stress hormone, those level, that is in the feathers when they're grown. So while they're growing the feathers, it's retained in the feather somehow.
So where are you now, Sarah?
I'm in Washington right now. Yeah, my partner lives here, and I get to see dunlin here. I just saw a flock of them over the weekend. But yeah, here for the winter and trying to find a job to make it up to Alaska for the summer again.
Good luck.
Yeah. Thank you. It is rough. But if you hear of anything, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. It was fine.
our next meeting in April will be precursor to the Shorebird Festival, Milo, is that correct?
I don't know. Do we have one? We'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, working on it.
And what's the next one?
Next week is Sky Starretts and Alicia Cipher talking about diving into kelp. They're gonna have a little presentation, but it's gonna be also some open discussion. So that's next Tuesday here. So, yeah.
Thanks for showing up. Great turnout. Great questions. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Christina. That was really fun.
Yeah.
Bye, you guys.
Yeah.